What happens every single time you look at the mirror and then you see yourself not having abs just yet, not having a T body, or when every time you step on the scale, your number is so far away from your ideal weight? What happens then? You beat yourself up because you're so far from the goal. That's where some people fall off. You are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. You are only entitled to the action themselves. Alright, so before we dive in, just a friendly reminder from one amateur to another, everything you hear here is more of a try it on and see kind of deal. Life is not a one size fits all, and neither is advice. So take what fits, leave what doesn't, and don't forget, we're all just figuring things out as we go. Welcome to the Amateur Podcast. Today, I want to talk about progress. And so at some point, I have a hard time trying to celebrate progress. And I think a lot of you actually have this kind of experience where you've done the work, you've went to the gym, you've studied, you've reached a specific point in your life but still feel guilty or still feel that you have a long way to go. I want to get to the root cause of that mindset. And at least on my end, I want to focus on why I also think that way. We no longer focus on the actions. We're hyper focused on the numbers, the outcomes of those actions. And I know everyone knows about this, or everyone has this kind of experience. Because at school, at sometimes, we no longer focus on the things that we've learned, because at some point we forget the material after we've taken a specific exam. So what does that mean? We're hyper focused on the grades, not much on the learning. In fitness, we're hyper focused on the number of packs that we see on our stomach or the number on the scale. And people have been saying to not focus on the number of the scale, but that's where we count our progress, right? Because numbers, quantifiable results, are progress. We are so focused on the outcomes of our actions rather than the action that we do instead. And it's not our fault. Society has grown. Society has been built towards this. From the growth of factories where time has become commodified, the focus there was on how work was done and how much was done. People are now focused on optimizing every single movement for output because we need to get more money. Corporations started measuring it by KPIs, profits, or quarterly results. And then suddenly, at the rise of tech, we're now on our phones. The number of likes your posts have gotten, the number of followers your Instagram account or your TikTok account has. At school, your grades. If you're a sales agent, the number of sales that you've done. We're now further reinforced on the fixation of outcomes. And why is this a problem? It's a problem because we don't actually have control over the outcomes. It's very subtle. We don't have control over the outcomes because the outcomes are only things that happen after we've done the act. And then you think to yourself, like, what do you mean? Because to me, it still is a very hard concept to understand. Because what do you mean if I studied for an exam? Shouldn't I be focused on getting an A? No. You shouldn't be focused on getting an A. You should be focused on trying to understand the material. It's such a subtle thing for us to focus on, right? And then the next thing we talk about, I want abs. I want to be fit. What does fit mean? It gives you this reinforcement because every single day that you go to the gym is being set aside. You don't think about the gym. You don't think about whether or not you've counted your calories properly today because you're not focused on actions, you're focused on the outcome. So, what happens every single time you look at the mirror and then you see yourself not having abs just yet, or not having a T body just yet, or when every time you step on the scale, you see that your number is so far away from your ideal weight? What happens then? You beat yourself up because you're so far from the goal. And then that's where some people fall off. Because there's now thinking, oh, it's still a far away thing, There's too much work to put in. But you've completely forgotten the number of things that you have done from day 1 up until day 300. Because when you check at day 301, you still see no progress. Because you've tied progress to the outcome. You've looked at yourself in the mirror and say that you haven't progressed because you don't see radical changes yet. And that's where we want to focus, not on the outcomes, but more on the action. It's such a subtle change because instead of saying, I want abs by the summer, you're now hyper focused on, I want to track my calories every day. Subtle, because sometimes you might argue that these two things are the same. It's not. One thing is a thing that you can control. Tracking calories is within your control. Whether or not you lose weight is an output of the things that you've done prior. But essentially, you have no control over that. You are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. You are only entitled to the action themselves. So focus on that. So when you're in school, instead of saying, I want to pass this exam or I want to get an A on this test, you're driven by an outcome again. It completely neglects the material because you're now cramming. Sometimes you cheat just so you can get an A on the test. So you're driven by the grade, not by trying to understand the actual material. So focus on, okay, do I understand it? Can I teach it to someone else? That's why one of the key things for learning is for you to actually teach someone else to do it because you understand the material. When you take an exam, it's now easy for you because you're not focused on the outcome. You are focused on trying to understand it more, and so that you can explain it in concepts that you can also understand. A very subtle mindset shift. And I want to talk about a thing that had happened to me recently that I think a lot of you might find hilarious. So I've been living alone, and I've always wanted to save more. And by saving more, I also wanted to start cooking my meals at home. So I went to the groceries. I bought a lot of meat. I was so happy. It's like, whoa, meat! I mean, it's expensive, but like, there's so many portions on this amount or these kilos of meat. I could last a whole month for X amount of money. I was so happy. I was like, nice. I bought a kilo of chicken. Marinated chicken, because I still don't know how to marinate. That's still something that I'm trying to figure out. But I have bought a whole kilo of marinated chicken. When I got home, I portioned them all into Ziploc bags and then placed them in the refrigerator. And then I would defrost them at the morning when I wake up or at night when I wake up and then eat them for dinner because I have lunch. Right? And then recently, I tried cooking chicken. And for people who don't know how to cook, chicken is absolutely, for me, one of the harder parts or I wouldn't say hardest. Well, technically the amount of stuff that I've cooked, chicken trumps as the hardest ones that I've cooked yet. So I would say it was the hardest thing to cook because I was so happy. That's why I bought like tiny strips of meat only. Samgyeopsal, moksal, all those stuff. Because I've cooked them in like, samgyeopsals or like Korean barbecue places. But when I was cooking chicken, I was like, oh, okay. The oil's too hot already. I was like, all right, that's nice. And I dropped in my chicken and then boom, it was burnt. I was like, oh, okay, is this supposed to be the crispy part of the chicken? No, 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 no. I burnt that chicken. I was like, oh, okay. I placed it in, because, people say that you'd have to look into the chicken because sometimes it might be raw. So when I tried to poke in, the outer layer burnt. Inside, absolutely raw. I don't understand why that was so tough. I was like, I did it. I mean, I got so much oil. I fried it there. Probably the oil was too hot. I was so frustrated. 3 chicken pieces burnt. So what's the lesson there? Because if I hadn't started focusing on actions, I would have stopped cooking chicken altogether. But instead, I had to take a step back. I was so close to opening up a can of corned beef and saying, okay, I'm not gonna cook chicken right away, because I failed. The outcome in itself was cooking the chicken, and I burnt it. I had overcooked chicken, but after a few TikTok scrolling, trying to get rid of all the negative thoughts that I have because I was supposed to eat, but I was already hungry and I didn't want to run away from that. I was like, you know what? Yesterday, I didn't know how to cook chicken, or I've never cooked chicken. Today, I made a step forward towards learning how to cook chicken. Was it wrong? Did I burn the chicken? Hell yeah. I had to get rid of all the meat. No, not all the meat. I had to get rid of all the skin and the chicken, and I realized that the meat was also already overcooked inside. I was so sad. I had to eat skinless chicken for my dinner and then just use soy sauce to mask the flavor because all the marinade was gone. It was burnt. But then would I still cook chicken? Yeah. Because then again, if I was focused on the chicken being cooked properly, and if it wasn't cooked properly, I would have completely stopped cooking chicken altogether because I didn't achieve what I was setting out to achieve. But because there was a subtle mindset shift that I had to learn, and part of learning is trying, and trying means failing at some point. And that's when you focus on the doing. So I was now focusing on, okay, I didn't know how to cook chicken yesterday. I've never cooked chicken yesterday. I still don't know how to cook chicken today, but I've cooked chicken. Right? There is progress. And that's where we want to focus on. In the art of trying, we fail. As Jake would say, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. And since you're still alive and you constantly want to progress, celebrate it. Stop looking at the outcome because the outcome is something that is outside of your control. What you do have is what you do now. It's going to suck at first. You're going to burn a couple more chickens as you go along. But you've learned. You've tried it out. And you've kept moving forward. And that's what matters. For the love of the try, everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Amateur Podcast. This is Brant. I'll see you next time.